Trump to visit hurricane-ravaged Florida. U.S. President Donald Trump visits hurricane-ravaged Florida on Thursday, where police are probing the deaths of 8 patients inside a nursing home as Hurricane Irma left millions in the state without power. Police in Hollywood, north of Miami, opened a criminal investigation on Wednesday after finding 3 dead patients at the Rehabilitation Center at Hollywood Hill, a facility that had been operating with little or no air conditioning. 4 more patients died at or en route to hospital, and a 5th was later identified as having died the night before, officials said. The death toll from Irma stood at 81, with several hard-hit Caribbean islands accounting for more than half the fatalities, and officials continue to assess damage inflicted by the second major hurricane to strike the U.S. mainland this year. Trump will visit Fort Myers in southwest Florida, an area hard hit by the storm, for a briefing on Hurricane Irma. He will then travel south to Naples, Florida to meet with residents tackling the aftermath of storm, the White House said in a statement. The devastation left by Hurricane Irma was far greater, at least in certain locations, than anyone thought, but amazing people working hard, the president said in a tweet on Tuesday. One of the most powerful Atlantic storms on record, Irma bore down on the Caribbean with devastating force as it raked the northern shore of Cuba last week. It barreled into the Florida Keys island chain on Sunday, packing sustained winds of up to 130 miles per hour, 215 kilometers per hour, before plowing up the Gulf Coast of the state and dissipating. In addition to severe flooding across Florida and extensive property damage in the Keys, residents faced widespread power outages that initially plunged more than half the state into darkness. Some 4.3 million homes and businesses were still without power on Wednesday in Florida and neighboring states. About 150 of Florida's nearly 700 nursing facilities were without electricity as of Wednesday morning, according to the Florida Healthcare Association, which represents most of them. Florida Power and Light provided electricity to parts of the nursing home in Hollywood, but the facility was not on a county priority list for emergency power restoration, the utility said. Total insured losses from the storm are expected to run about $25 billion, including $18 billion in the United States and $7 billion in the Caribbean. Catastrophe modeler Karen Clark and Company estimated on Wednesday. The Florida Keys were particularly hard hit, with federal officials saying 90% of its homes were destroyed or heavily damaged. The remote island chain stretches nearly 100 miles, 160 kilometers, into the Gulf of Mexico from Florida's southern tip, connected by a single highway and series of bridges. On Key West, at the end of the archipelago, hundreds of residents who had refused evacuation orders lined up on Wednesday outside the island's Salvation Army outpost for water and military-style rations after enduring days of intense heat with little water, power or contact with the outside world. The stench of dead fish and decaying seaweed permeated the air. Irma wreaked utter devastation on several of the northern Leeward Islands of the Caribbean, where at least 43 people died. Irma hit Florida about 2 weeks after Hurricane Harvey plowed into Houston, killing about 60 and causing some $180 billion in damage, mostly from flooding. 8 elderly patients died after being left inside a stifling South Florida nursing home that lost power during Hurricane Irma, officials said on Wednesday, prompting a criminal probe and adding to the mounting loss of life from the storm. The overall death toll from Irma climbed to 81 on Wednesday, with several hard-hit Caribbean islands accounting for more than half the fatalities, and officials continue to assess damage inflicted by the second major hurricane to strike the U.S. mainland this year. Irma killed at least 31 people in Florida, plus 7 more in Georgia and South Carolina combined, authorities said. One of the most powerful Atlantic storms on record, Irma bore down on the Caribbean with devastating force as it raked the northern shore of Cuba last week before barreling into the Florida Keys island chain on Sunday, packing sustained winds of up to 130 miles per hour, 215 kilometers per hour. It then plowed north up the Gulf Coast of the state before dissipating. In addition to severe flooding across Florida and extensive property damage in the Keys, residents faced widespread power outages that initially plunged more than half the state into darkness. Some 4.3 million homes and businesses were still without power on Wednesday in Florida and neighboring states, down from 7.4 million customers on Monday. 3 elderly residents were found dead on Wednesday inside a nursing home in Hollywood, Florida, north of Miami. The Rehabilitation Center at Hollywood Hill had been operating with little or no air conditioning, officials said. 4 more patients died at or en route to a nearby hospital, and a 5th was later identified as having died the night before. Governor Rick Scott called the tragedy unfathomable, and said they had opened a criminal investigation, sealing off the building after the remaining patients were transferred to hospitals. City officials described the interior as excessively hot, despite portable air coolers and fans that, according to state records, had been placed throughout the facility. The 8 who died ranged in age from 71 to 99, according to the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office. The cause of their deaths has yet to be determined, but most of the survivors were treated for respiratory distress, dehydration and heat-related issues, Memorial Regional Hospital's Emergency Medical Director, Drive Randy Katz, told reporters. Representatives of the for-profit nursing home, which had received a below-average grade from Medicare's rating system for such facilities, could not immediately be reached for comment. The physician listed in state records as its manager, Jack Michelle, previously ran afoul of state and federal regulators over assisted living facilities that he partially owned. In 2006, he and 3 co-defendants paid $15.4 million to settle Medicare and Medicaid fraud claims against them, according to the U.S. Justice Department. Trump to visit Keys. Florida Power and Light provided electricity to parts of the nursing home, but the facility was not on a county top-tier list for emergency power restoration, the utility said. Total insured losses from the storm are expected to run about $25 billion, including $18 billion in the United States and $7 billion in the Caribbean. Catastrophe modeler Karen Clark and Company estimated on Wednesday. The Florida Keys were particularly hard hit, with federal officials saying 90% of its homes were destroyed or heavily damaged. The remote island chain stretches nearly 100 miles, 160 kilometers, into the Gulf of Mexico from Florida's southern tip, connected by a single highway and series of bridges. On Key West, at the end of the archipelago, hundreds of residents who had refused evacuation orders lined up on Wednesday outside the island's Salvation Army outpost for water and military-style rations after enduring days of intense heat with little water, power or contact with the outside world. The stench of dead fish and decaying seaweed permeated the air. Elizabeth Martinez, 61, said the ordeal, including losing part of a roof of her home, had convinced her it was time to leave the island. "I'm saving my money up and moving out of here," she said. But David Chiatti, a 58-year-old painter, predicted Key West would bounce back quickly. "That's what we do," he said. "This is a small community where everybody knows each other and takes care of each other." President Donald Trump was due to visit Florida on Thursday. Irma wreaked utter devastation on several of the northern Leeward Islands of the Caribbean, where at least 43 people have died. Irma hit Florida about 2 weeks after Hurricane Harvey plowed into Houston, killing about 60 and causing some $180 billion in damage, mostly from flooding. Hurricane Irma left Florida days ago, but the state's economy, the 4th largest in the U.S., is feeling the hit. Its citrus groves are littered with knocked-down fruit and felled trees. Beach hotels and restaurants are cleaning up after being shut for a week with forced evacuations. After the cancellation of hundreds of flights and numerous cruises, the state's airports and seaports are just reopening. And on the Space Coast, home to the Kennedy Space Center, officials were still assessing potential damage and disruptions to launch schedules. In the tourism magnet of Miami Beach, where the city's roughly 22,000 hotel rooms stood virtually empty for a week, the lost revenue from that stream alone could top $25 million, according to city and industry tourism figures. Irma is going to be a very significant financial burden on businesses, said Jerry Libman, chief executive of the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce. To be sure, the state is still struggling with loss of life in the storm's aftermath, not counting the deaths of 8 nursing home patients Wednesday after Hurricane Irma knocked out power. At least 17 people in Florida have died under Irma-related circumstances, Associated Press reported late Wednesday. Losses in agriculture, the state's second-largest industry after tourism, are expected to be in the billions of dollars, according to the Florida Farm Bureau. In Okeechobee County in southern Florida, for instance, an informal evaluation cited by the Farm Bureau pegged the loss at $16 million. Overall, the total economic cost of Irma, including property damage and lost economic output, could reach $83 billion, according to an estimate by Moody's Analytics. That compares with a toll as high as $108 billion for Hurricane Harvey, which struck Texas last month, the firm said. Catastrophe modeling firm Karen Clark and Company calculated that insured losses from Irma would be $18 billion. The storm caused the most structural damage in the Florida Keys, while impacts on the mainland owed chiefly to fallen trees and inland flooding, according to the firm. Yet Florida's economy is in solid shape, with a booming population that reached 20.6 million last year, record numbers of tourists and a growing healthcare sector, said Sean Snaith, an economist at the University of Central Florida. The state's gross domestic product, a broad measure of goods and services produced, grew 3% last year, compared with 1.5% in the U.S., according to the Board of Economic Advisors. It's going to be a bit of a setback, but I don't think it's sufficient to knock us off the trend we've been on growth-wise, he said. Tourism officials emphasized that attractions were back in business. Busch Gardens Tampa Bay, an amusement park, said it was open for visitors and all of its 12,000 animals accounted for. In Orlando, Walt Disney World opened for normal hours Wednesday, except for its water resorts and a few hotels. The Legoland theme park was set to reopen Thursday, and the Orlando Eye, a 40-story observation wheel, was scheduled to resume operations pending completion of safety checks. It is rare for Orlando's theme parks to close down. When Disney World closed at 5 p.m. Saturday and reopened Tuesday, it was only the fifth time the park had shut for a full day or more in its 46 years, according to a spokeswoman. The most recent closing was in October 2016, for a day and a half due to Hurricane Matthew. Carnival Cruise Line, which canceled a half-dozen voyages scheduled to depart last weekend, was resuming service. Starting Thursday, all sailings are scheduled to depart on time, the cruise operator said. Jacksonville Beach in northern Florida was returning to normal Wednesday, with beachgoers playing cornhole at oceanfront bars. The beachside seafood restaurant and market had few empty seats. Though the establishment lost power for a short time during the storm, it didn't lose fresh seafood and other merchandise, said owner Jason Artiga. After seeing reports of the devastation from Hurricane Harvey and the ominous forecasts for Irma, Mr. Artiga said he had been bracing for a lengthy disruption of his business. "I'm counting my blessings that we didn't have more time down," he said. "People are definitely out and about." But Irma's damage wasn't as easily cleaned up for farmers who are contending with power failures, ruined crops and damaged equipment, according to the Florida Farm Bureau. In Brevard County, east of Orlando, roughly 50,000 acres of pasture were underwater Wednesday, jeopardizing the health of cattle, the Farm Bureau said. In Putnam County, west of St. Augustine, vegetable growers couldn't enter fields because storm damage blocked access. Blueberry producers in Central Florida were grappling with acreage that remained submerged. Florida Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam took an aerial tour of the state Wednesday and said he saw huge swaths of destruction, including sheds and buildings split apart. He estimated the crop loss in southwest Florida would exceed 70% because of flooding of root systems and downed trees. "Agriculture took it on the chin," he said. "I was surprised by the scale of flooding." Florida's $800 million citrus industry, which has battled a host of challenges in recent years including disease, was especially hurt, with growers concerned that losses will reach 50% of the crop. "Every single citrus grove has been affected adversely in some way by Hurricane Irma," said Michael Sparks, chief executive of the Florida Citrus Mutual, a marketing cooperative. For the tourism industry, which generates more than $100 billion in visitor spending annually, getting back up to speed is proving a slow process. On Wednesday, the National Hotel in South Beach reopened with limited service, with full service expected by the weekend. Though the hotel's two buildings didn't experience significant damage, it has definitely been an outdoor disaster, said Yasser Mohammed, the general manager. "The storm sent water into lobbies, coated the grounds and sand and ravaged the landscaping. With 152 rooms closed for a week, the financial hit from cancellations likely exceeds $150,000, Mr. Muhammad said. At Hank and Harry's Delicatessen, an eatery several blocks away, workers scrambled Wednesday to get the place fully operational by Friday. The restaurant lost an estimated $60,000 in sales, along with $25,000 in lost inventory, said owner Buzzy Sklar. There's really still no one on the streets, he said. But given that Miami was spared a direct hit by Irma, he said, we got lucky. We will survive.